All right, hello. Welcome to the Off by One security stream. Just a quick check to make sure you can hear me. I don't know if you can hear me. Let me check something real quick. Give me a moment. All right, is my mic working? Yes, it seems to be working. Just give me a heads up. Let me know if you can hear me okay. Sometimes StreamYard acts up with certain microphones I have plugged in. And I know when you type in a response to me and when I see it come up on a chat, it takes like 30 seconds to come through for some reason. But just somebody give me a heads up that you can hear me and we will get moving forward. Otherwise, all good. Okay, great. Sweet. Thank you. So let's get started then. So first off, my apologies for missing a couple weeks or a few weeks. Things got quite busy and I wasn't able to get people lined up or get a good topic going here. So I wanted to make sure I do it right. So this one, I scheduled it like on Monday or Tuesday to kind of like tell myself, hey, you need to do a stream this week. So get going. I will try to keep up on it so we have it weekly going forward. Obviously, some weeks are going to be challenging with travel and stuff. I'm hoping to have a couple sessions coming up. One I want to do is on the forensic footprint that we leave behind as red teamers or attackers. You may have heard me mention this before in the past, but like many of us think that we must be super stealthy because we never get caught by the defense. And that's probably not the case. We probably are pretty noisy. It's just that many organizations aren't doing a real good job at collecting the right logs and alerting and such properly. So that's not a good thing, of course. So I've been trying to come up with topics. Some people have hit me up and just said, hey, can you talk about the defense a bit more when you can? And so the last session I did, I think that was the one where I went through exploit guard. Or we started to go through exploit guard anyway. We didn't really get too deep, but we talked about a few of the mitigations and we were focusing mostly on user mode. And the majority, I would say, of the mitigations are user mode enforced. And with Emmet, the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit, I believe they were all user mode for the most part. But with exploit guard, there were additional mitigations added, such as attack surface reduction and or don't allow processes to call anything in the Win32k syscall table unless it's a GUI thread. Things like that were added. And some of these, it makes more sense that the kernel would be the one enforcing that mitigation. But I hadn't personally done much research or looking into that stuff. So I was kind of thinking, which mitigation or mitigations do I want to cover in the next session? And the one I selected in the list was do not allow child processes. And so I just assumed that it's going to be another user mitigation, user land mitigation. My assumption was that there was going to be a hook with the function call to create process or nt create process, and that it would be similar to how it enforces the protections like stack to the protection. And what's another example? Import address table protection. But it ends up not being the case. I figured that it would just be, okay, we're going to hook it. And then if someone tries to call create process, we'll just kill it in user mode. And I don't, there's got to be some obvious reason that I'm just not thinking of as to why they made this a kernel enforced mitigation. But that's the way it ended up being. So the first thing I did, and I haven't spent as much time as I'd like to on it. The first thing I did, though, is I went over to payload restrictions.dll, which is the user land component of exploit guard. So before it was emmet.dll, now it's payload restrictions.dll. And as we saw in the past, I'm using an old system on my host again to try and deal with these driver issues. So forgive me there. How did I open calc? I didn't mean to open calc. I meant to open magnifier. All right. So this will allow me to zoom in. I don't use the magnifier on the guest operating system because for whatever reason, it hangs IDA up. I don't know if it's still the case, but it's been the case for a long time where if you open up the magnifier on the system where IDA is running, it causes IDA to crash, which is a strange anomaly. So anyway, zooming in here, you can see the function names and mitigation library. And then you see import address filtering protect module. Or another example, if we go down, mem reader gadget check or export address table or export address filtering plus. Like those are all user land mitigations. Like for example, the export address filtering mitigation, the plus one, it's trying to prevent dynamic allocated memory from being able to read the symbols inside the exports table to be able to resolve symbols. So that's like shellcode protection right there. But a lot of these, again, are user land. So what I did initially is I just went in here and looked in the functions list to see if there's any reference to like child processes in a name. So I just did a string search through the whole thing, and there were no references at all to the word child anywhere. So that's one thing I did. And then the next thing I did is I hooked on a program that I wrote that creates a child process. I set a breakpoint on the call to create process inside that userland process, and when it hooked it, I evaluated kind of what's going on there to see, like, if you were here with me a few weeks ago when I did the example, we walked through, I think it was stack pivot protection. I'm pretty sure it was stack pivot protection, but it might have been something else. Either way, we hooked it both, or we set a breakpoint without the mitigation on, and we saw how it behaved. And then we set a breakpoint with the mitigation on, and it basically did exactly what it just said. It hooked it. It modified the code that was normally there so that you end up going into the payload restrictions.dll, and it went through and did some evaluation. Specifically, we saw that it looked at the thread information block and it checked the stack base limit high and low. And if the stack pointer was between that address range, it allowed continuation. Otherwise, it terminated the process. So again, I assumed that might be the case here. So I set the breakpoint on create process, and it didn't do anything. Like, it just went into kernel mode, and then it died in there somewhere. So that's obviously how I quickly determined that this is something enforced in the kernel. So the next thing that I did was set a breakpoint in a kernel debugger. And we're going to go through this stuff soon here, but I set a breakpoint in a kernel debugger on the create process suite of functions, create user process specifically, nt create user process. And I was expecting a hook there, but there was no hook like I was expecting to see in userland. So what it ends up doing is I was just kind of walking through it and looking at the function calls, and it was going into these different functions that were added in, and then the symbol names quickly were pretty obvious. You will see them here in a moment, but there are symbols that specifically state that it is the protection for preventing a child process to be spawned. So that was pretty simple. One thing I'll do here real quickly, though, I'm going to go over to this. This is the ntas kernel. So this is the kernel image file. So ntas kernel.exe that's sitting there in your system32 folder. So this is the kernel itself. And the kernel, as you probably know, is split into two pieces, the kernel executive and then the kernel itself. The kernel executive handles high-level operations, and the kernel itself is more low-level operations, to summarize. Not doing it justice, of course. But inside the ntas kernel is where we're going to see the nt create user process function. That's where it resides. And so that's why I'm looking in this particular binary. But I'm going to do a quick string search. Actually, it probably won't be very quick, but for the word child. And we're doing a search through the entire thing for child, because that's one way that we could see if there's any references to the mitigation. There's many ways we could approach this. But right now I'm doing it the method without actually running the process and tracing it that way. So I'm going to let this run in the background. I've got a kernel debug session set up already. So the system you're looking at right now is my debugger system. And then the system next to it up here, this is my target VM. So I've got a Windows 10 kernel debugging setup using network debugging with WinDebug. So this is the target system that we're going to be debugging. On here, I've got IDA open as well, and it's specifically looking at this program called createProcess.exe. This is just a simple little binary that when you execute it, it wants an argument as to what child process you want it to create, and it calls createProcess. They're very simple. So if I show it to you over here, if we run the program createProcess.exe, calc, it pops a calculator open. So again, just a simple process that just spawns up a child process. So what we would expect to see is that if I turn the mitigation on, that calculator wouldn't pop up. So again, if we run it, it spawns a calculator, no problem. But now I'm going to turn on the mitigation. So if we go to exploit guard, you can see I added the program create process to the programs to be protected. We go into edit. As usual, all the mitigations are turned off by default because that's the standard. I imagine at some point this will be changed as Microsoft feels more comfortable that the mitigations aren't going to negatively impact things. But for now, they're all off, so we don't have to worry about this so much. But they don't usually tell you when they're going to turn something on. Just like suddenly something is turned on and you don't find out unless it breaks something, including your exploit. A good example of that would be way back in 2014 when the mitigations targeting browser exploits came out. That was deferred free and memgc and isolated heap. Microsoft didn't announce that those were coming out. Just suddenly your exploits stopped working, which was fun. So that's something we can look forward to. So now I'm going to say go ahead and turn it on. So the mitigation disable Win32k syscalls. Actually, that's not the one I want. I want to do not allow child processes. So that's the one I want to put on. I'm going to turn this one back off. So the Win32k syscall one, that was another one I was looking at. That's the one that says you can only access the NT syscall table through NTDLL and not the Win32k syscall table. So anyway, I've got do not allow child processes on. We'll apply it. We say okay. And now when I go back and try to run this command, it should block it. And now you can see create process failed. So the mitigation is working as expected. It blocked this program from creating a child process. So one thing I want to point out, since I've been asked a lot about defense, and it's important, obviously, that the offense and defense work together. Also, it's important for an offensive person to understand the defense because you want to know what the defense is typically doing so you can try to avoid mistakes or try to get around their monitoring. You know, one example, you hear a lot about adversary emulation, and there's a lot of products out there. I'll just pick on an open source one, Caldera, right? MITRE ATT&CK, Caldera. That's a free one out there, and that's just an implant, and you can install it on a system, and you can tell it to do things. You tell it to emulate an APT group, like APT28. And when you tell it to go, the first thing they typically do is run Mimikatz. So if you've got credential guard running, that's going to break your Mimikatz attack from working, at least in a standard form, because the LSAS process is, you know, mirrored over there in the secure kernel instance as an isolated user mode process. So that's the first thing it does. And then it attempts to do lateral movement. It'll run things like PSExec style things to try to laterally move to other systems. And this allows the defense to tune their SOC dashboards and such and their event monitoring when they've got their, when they're collecting all these log files in and they're triaging it and normalizing everything, and they're creating a SOC dashboard that watches for certain things. A lot of them are basing it off like that. They're instrumenting a system and they're watching for the obvious commands that an APT group would do. That can be PowerShell commands. It can be a bunch of different things. And so like one thing you want to do as an attacker is be able to create your own custom implant. Like even Cobalt Strike and other things out of the box, the endpoint protection is pretty solid. Like it knows what to expect and what to look for. So by being able to create your own custom implant and testing it against the endpoint protection applications that you want to be able to bypass, like that's an important thing to be able to do. I was talking to Jonathan Ryder. I had him on a few weeks ago or months ago. He's the author of a SANS course, 670. And that course is all about writing your own custom implant to do exactly that, to make it so the endpoint protection product that you're trying to get around doesn't detect you. So why was I saying all this? I'm saying all of this because right now I just turned a mitigation on and ran a program that's supposed to create a child process, and it was blocked. Now the question is this stuff written to the log, to the event manager? And yes, it is. Microsoft's done a great job with making that better. I think it was the first time I saw ETW, which is the event tracing for Windows or whatever, as a provider, it was when the Crypt32 vulnerability came out. Remember the NSA like 3 or 4 years ago disclosed to Microsoft a vulnerability in ECC, so the elliptical curve crypto system, where certificate signing could be spoofed. That was a pretty significant vulnerability. And I remember seeing a new function that actually wrote to the event manager information about someone trying to exploit that vulnerability. So even if your system was patched and they wouldn't be able to exploit you, it still created a log entry to let you know someone tried to do that. And I thought that was pretty neat. And so all these mitigations are written to event manager. So as a defender, you would want to monitor for that stuff. Even if you turn this stuff on, a lot of the mitigations have audit only mode. So you don't actually have to enforce it, but it's more like intrusion detection where it alerts, but it doesn't actually block or prevent. You can turn on auditing, and then you can monitor that section in the event manager in your logs to collect that data to see if someone's doing something. So from the defensive side, like, you want to be monitoring that stuff, even if you're not enforcing these mitigations, to know if someone did something. On the offensive side, you want to know what people are capable of logging and what things typically look like, so you can get around those sensors from picking things up. So if we go to Event Manager right now, we should be able to find that. So I'm going to go and bring up Event Viewer. And then I think it's under Applications and Service Logs. It's going to take me a moment to find it, and it's going to be slow because it's got to load all the logs up. My command on the other system should be done by now, which was the searching for the word child inside the ntas kernel. So I'll let this do its thing for a moment. Let's go back over here. So here's all my hits. We've got a ton of hits. I'm going to sort it here. And starting from the top, we don't care about all this stuff at the very top here, this data. So if we go down, we see some classes, create child. I'm not expecting you to read this. Don't worry. I'm just searching for something. We see ETW. So that's going to be interesting. Let me zoom in there. That right there is the event tracing for Windows. I think that's what that stands for. And you can see it says prohibit child process. And there's a couple of references here. So that's a function that's interesting. This, to me, I would guess that if you turn on audit only, that's the function that's going to be responsible for writing it to your log as a log entry. So, okay, we can keep going down. Nothing interesting. Query, process enumerate. And here's one that's interesting right there. PSP, which stands for process support private, I think is what that entry is. Apply mitigation options. And inside this function, there's a call to a function called PSP, set no child process restricted policy. So again, set no child process restricted policy. That's a really interesting symbol, because that sounds like it's the one that's going to turn on the mitigation that we're talking about right now. If we keep going down lower, we see one here, PSP get no child. So there's set and there's get. So set, obviously we're turning it on. Get, we're checking that option to see if it's on. Keep going down lower. Here we see some more. SE token is no child process restriction enforced. Get no child process restricted. And these are SE ones. So if you're not familiar with SE, SE is stands for security. So you can go Google for, I would say, like something like kernel function prefix list. Actually, let's do that real quick and see if we can find that. I'm just going to search for Windows kernel function prefix list and see if it comes up with anything good. Oh, there's one literally called that. So let's bring that up and see if it's what I want. Your browser's out of date. Yeah, I know. Is it going to let me go anyway? No. Wow, it's blocking me because my browser's out of date. That's funny. It's just a VM. All right, let me go back here. What does a ZW prefix mean? So you'll see ZW is another one. Let's see if there's anything in here. There we go. That looks good. So this is a small list. This is not all of them by any means. There are like hundreds of them, I think. But you can see EX stands for executive. HAL is the hardware abstraction layer. IO manager, KE is kernel. We don't see SE here, but I think SE is security. And there's something called the security reference monitor in the kernel. What you have a lot of times, if you're not familiar with tokens, those are really important, and they're going to be really important with what we're looking at here. So we're about to get pretty technical shortly. I know you've heard of tokens before, and it may be from the perspective of when you sign on to a Windows domain, you get a ticket granting ticket, and there's a TGS server, and there's a TGT, and a overall the part of the whole Kerberos authentication process where like you send over your SID, your security ID, and it looks up in the database in Active Directory. That's Kerberos will look up in the Active Directory database, and it will use your password hash to actually encrypt some session objects that gets back and forth. And the whole process that it's doing, it's like it's encrypting something with your password hash as the key so that you can prove that you are who you say you are. So your system transparently is going to decrypt that session object that gets sent over with your password hash as the key. And then you're going to make some modifications, re-encrypt it, send it back over to Kerberos, and you have now validated that you are who you say you are. So no longer are we sending the password hash via a handshake across the network. Why am I saying that? Because there's tokens involved. Your security access token is what I'm referring to. And inside your security access token is going to be all the SIDs of your users itself, as well as the groups that you are a member of. So every group will have a SID that gets put into your security access token. And then when you end up accessing a resource, let's say it's a SharePoint server, that SharePoint server is going to be able to decrypt the ticket. You can't decrypt the ticket, because if you could modify things and do bad stuff. So it can be decrypted by the whatever it is you're connecting to, like a SharePoint server, and that's going to go and it's going to add in some additional SIDs if you have any local groups you're a member of, and it creates your security access token is what I meant to say. So your security access token is created on the resource you're accessing, and lots of things get tokens. Tokens are important because, and the token has a structure associated with it and lots of member fields inside of it, and that token gets inspected a lot. Like if you're trying to do something from userland into the kernel, your token's going to get inspected. Yeah, SE security reference monitor. Thanks. Yeah, so security reference monitor is that thing I was, thanks, explaining before. So when you, as a process or a thread within a process, attempt to make a system call into the kernel, that's going to get trapped by the executive. There's a model specific register and other things that are going to be involved to inspect your token. And then if everything's okay, it's going to look up in a dispatch table. It's going to do a little calculation, a little fancy calculation. It's going to look up in a dispatch table the function that you want to access, and then it'll let you continue onward. So the reason I'm saying all this is because we just saw that reference here to SE, get no child process, set no child process, is no child process, restriction enforced. So that's important. You probably heard of token impersonation as well. If you've ever used the old tool like Incognito with Metasploit. And another big thing that we do in the kernel is we do token stealing. Because if we can steal the token of process ID 4 is always the system process, and we can steal its token because a token's at a static offset within the token structure, or actually within the eProcess structure. So eProcess is a big structure, and an offset within eProcess is going to be where your token is stored. And we can walk the AP links to find process ID number 4, and then we can steal that token. That's another, common thing that we do. So enough on that. Let's go back over to the event guy here. So now you can see we have Event Manager up. I'm going to go down to, that ends up not, I'm going to go under Microsoft, Windows, and this should be the right one. Yeah, this is definitely the right one. So let me zoom in here. And I'm going to go down to security and hope there's a spot here. There we go. Security mitigations. Kernel mode, user mode. Click on kernel. And look what comes up here, security mitigations. And it says down here, was blocked from creating a child process. So that's another way you know it's a kernel mitigation, because it's in the kernel log entry. It's not in user land. If we go over to user land, we see maybe, no, there's no events in user land because I haven't done anything on this system since I reverted it to a snapshot. But if we did something like a stack pivot, then it would, if it was violation, it would get recorded there. So as a defender, I'd want to watch for this because there are event IDs associated with it. So you see event ID 4 is the one specific to creating a child process. Event ID 10 is blocked from making system calls into the Win32k sys. That's pretty neat. You know what's interesting here? I just realized that I made a mistake. Yesterday, I tweeted I was setting a breakpoint on something in the kernel and it wasn't hitting it. And I was mad at WinDebug. Well, I just realized what I did. You saw that mistake. Like, remember when we looked at Exploit Guard a moment ago and it was set up for the Win32k syscall protection and not the create child process protection? Well, that explains why I wasn't hitting my breakpoint. So brilliant. So I just learned my mistake. So I'm willing to admit that. So now we should definitely hit the breakpoint. So that's awesome. Okay, so I just wanted to show you where that stuff is stored. And as a defender, you want to watch for that stuff, even if you're not actually enforcing the mitigation and only have it in audit mode. Someone said, have I found any 0 days recently considering these mitigations in place? So I say it often that getting crashes to occur, finding bugs that are interesting because they could potentially be exploitable is the easier part nowadays when you compare it to the actual weaponization, the weaponization of that vulnerability. So you can run a fuzzer and you can get a bunch of crashes. And when you go to weaponize that, being able to actually make it exploitable becomes challenging because of the mitigations, not even the ones that we're talking about here. These mitigations are almost always off, but the default mitigations associated with HVCI and VBS, the virtualization-based security in general, makes life very difficult. And I think I mentioned the last time I had a session here that Ruben Boonen and Chompy, they took a patch on Patch Tuesday and weaponized it by Wednesday, which is very impressive. It's a lot of work to do that. And to be able to weaponize that within 24 hours, it was a kernel privilege escalation vulnerability. And we all know that the previous mode technique that we've loved for years has been mitigated if you're on a recent version of Windows. So you need to find a new way to get a read-write primitive. And they used a technique that was discovered or disclosed by, oh shoot, who was it? It slipped my mind, but it'll come back to me. And so that was really neat. So sometimes the mitigations are going to be strong enough to prevent you from doing what you want to do. And other times you just got to get real creative. So a lot of the techniques that we've loved over the years have been mitigated. So a lot of times it's a one-off technique that only works in a certain situation. So exploitation, I've said this a million times, is harder nowadays, but not impossible. But that's why the value, that's why the price tag on these mitigations has skyrocketed versus years ago, because they know that not everyone's capable of doing this. You have to really, really want to learn it. But I mean, go back to your question, have I found some 0 days considering the mitigations? Yeah, I've got crashes. Weaponizing them isn't always possible, but it's possible sometimes. That's all I really say. I mean, yes, I do find them and do disclose them. I've always disclosed things privately through handles and stuff like that because I do it for profit. I mean, I'll be honest, I do bug hunting for profit. I don't just disclose it and do it for free because it takes me weeks and weeks of work to find and weaponize something. So of course you want to get paid for your time. Q jumper. No, I haven't researched that. I'll have to check that out. I don't know what that is. Yeah, cool. All right, let's keep going here. So now that I found out that I've got the right mitigation on, something that wasn't working for me before should totally work now. So great. So where are we at? We now have the mitigation on, and I want to set a breakpoint in the kernel on create process. So this is one thing that's kind of challenging. If you've ever done kernel debugging, depending on what you're trying to do, if you want to set a breakpoint on a process that hasn't spawned yet, that can be painful. Sometimes there's little tricks you can do. Other times it's a real big pain, and you've got to write your own WinDebug extension to be able to do it properly. So I'm going to try to do it the lazy way here. And hopefully, since there's not much going on in this system other than what I'm doing, we won't hit a breakpoint. And normally I would set a breakpoint on a specific process, because when you're setting kernel breakpoints, that's going to be a general breakpoint for all processes running, because the kernel is just one big thing. So if you set a breakpoint on something that's commonly hit, like a memset function, you're going to get annoyed because it's going to hit it constantly. So you can go into the context of a process and specify the breakpoint on that process specifically. You just need to get the eProcess address and specify the /p option, and that will work. All right, so let me make sure my kernel debugger is actually working right now. I'm just going to hit break and see if we pause. All right, so we pause. We're in the kernel right now, so we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and set a breakpoint on NT create user process. See if it just takes that. All right, no complaints about symbols. So we've got a breakpoint in there. So now this is a general kernel breakpoint. So anytime create process gets hit, we're going to pause. So we'll see if it gets annoying or not. Cool. Just looking at questions here. What would I rate 0 to 10 on weaponizing crashes? I mean, it all depends on. I mean, I'd say it's at least in the kernel. It's at least like a 7. It's never below that I see anymore. But more likely, it's going to be like an 8 or a 9. Sometimes they get really hard, or sometimes they're impossible. All right, so let's go here. We got the breakpoint set up. I'm going to say go, and kernel debugger's running. So let's go over here to this guy, and let's run my command. So I hit enter, and create process failed. So it did not hit the breakpoint for some reason. We'll have to go back and check here. And you can see it says failed because the mitigation is on. So let's go back over to my other system here, see what happened. All right. So let's pause here, clear out all my breakpoints. I'm just going to settle an NT. Maybe it just didn't give it the prefix. That's going to be my first desperate attempt to find out why it didn't do that. All right, let's go, and let's see if it breaks this time when I run it. There we go. So this time it paused execution. That right there is a dumb thing that I ran into. Like, because I didn't specify NT as the module, the ntas kernel, it just like didn't do what I wanted it to do. It probably thought it was some userland function. Either way, we hit the breakpoint, and you can see it's paused. So if we go back over here on the debugger, you can see we are at the breakpoint. Okay, so first thing I want to do is validate that I'm in the right process. So there's a couple ways we can go about doing this. One thing we can do is look at the current thread. So if I say unassemble function nt bang ps get current thread, let's see if it gives us back anything. So right there, what we're looking at here is this function get current thread. Now, a lot of these functions that you'll see they're just going and grabbing like structural, like information that's stored in a structure already. For example, like that's what the tib is for in userland, and the peb. The tib is a per thread structure that stores information that's needed by the thread. So we don't have to run a bunch of code to go get something that's already stored somewhere. For example, if I want to get a pointer to the process environment block, I can dereference offset 30 in 32-bit from FS, or a different offset in 64-bit via the GS register. So that's essentially what's happening right here. What this is doing is it's going into an existing structure to get information. What structure is this? This is going to be the kernel processor control block, or process control region block. There's two different structures. One's the prcb and the other one's KThread. So we're going to look at both. So I'm going to go over to Virgilius because Virgilius is great. So I'm going into a little bit more detail than you probably need. Yeah, specifically, it's the KThread it's the default offset 0 in EThread is the KThread pointer. So what we're grabbing is the KThread pointer. So we can, but they're both the same, right? Because they're both at offset 0 in that structure. So it's the same with E process. The offset 0 in E process is K process pointer, or the nested structure. And then in EThread is KThread at offset 0. Either way, what I want to do now is simply look at the processor region control block. So if we say in Virgilius, which is again a beautiful resource, in a structure. So KP, it's like not responding to me right now. All right, KPCR, we click on this structure. Now, when we look at this structure, some of these structures are very large. I'm going to scroll down. You can see it stops at hex 118. Well, when we go back over here, it wants offset 188. Well, that goes out of bounds here. So inside the debugger, if we say DT for dump type and underscore KPCR, look at the bottom here at offset 180 is the KPRCB structure. So we need to look at the KPRCB structure at offset 8 within it. So we can do it here, or we can do it in Virgilius. I'll just go back over to Virgilius. And now I'm going to go into KPCRB. That's the kernel. Kernel processor region control block. This typing's driving me nuts. For whatever reason, I type a key and it goes really slowly. All right, so KPRCB. Now we look at offset 8 right here. And look at that. It's pointer to KThread. So that's what we're grabbing. That's where we get the current thread. That's the kernel thread. So you can see it's going to dereference basically the KThread pointer into the register here that we care about. So we're moving into racks dereference inside the kernel processor region control block, the pointer to KThread. Now there's multiple ways that we can find out things. Like we need to know, and always remember that depending on the version of Windows, these offsets could change, but they're always the same for that version of Windows. But keep that in mind, because I've seen people like even in a capture the flag, I was working with somebody and they did a beautiful job getting an exploit ready to go, but they were using the wrong offsets. It cost us a bunch of time because like all you had to do is go and modify the offsets in your shell code to steal the token, and bam, it worked. So you got to always watch for something silly like that. Seems obvious, but it's easy to forget. Either way, we've got that. So what I want to do now is I need to know what process I'm currently in, because if we're going to start examining things, we don't want to be looking at the wrong process because we're setting kernel breakpoints. So we could be anywhere. Now, there's multiple ways you can do this. You can do it manually. You can do it the harder way. There's extensions that do it for you. But let's do it this way. I'm going to ask a question. So question. Let me zoom in so you can see a bit better. And then we're going to say, this is just one you memorize, or you keep it written down somewhere so you don't have to think about it. What we're going to do is look inside a structure, at a member within one structure to a member of another structure so we can find something specific. So I'm going to start with prcb. We already talked about that. And inside prcb, I want to go specifically to the current thread. And inside current thread, I want to look specifically at APC state. And the member in that structure that I want to look at is going to be process. So we run this, what we get, I got an error. Let me see what my error is. Give me a second. Oh, I forgot to put a closing parenthesis. So when we run this, you can see we get this back. This is the eProcess handle. That's what we get here. So we can manually take this, and I can say bang process, give it that space 0. And what it tells me is we're inside cmd.exe. So if I thought that I was inside the create process program that I want to be in, I'm not in there right now. So doing a quick check to make sure you're in the process you want to be, there's many ways we can do this. This is one of them. So another thing we can do is we can just feed that syntax right here straight to it as an argument. So I can just say bang process and give it that, and it just runs the command all at once for us. But that's a lot to remember, so it's easy to just write that stuff down. Another thing that we want to get familiar with, if you don't know about it, is the extension DML-proc. DML-proc shows you all the eProcess handles and the PIDs running and what process it is next to it. So you can see that I don't see create process in this list. Create process isn't running yet because we're just now calling create process to create the process for that sub program that I want to make, right? So it's not yet created. So if I want to watch through how the process, if I want to set like a breakpoint early on now and see from runtime of that function or that program that we're starting up, that process, create process, we can do that. Or we can let it continue and we can say the next time we hit the breakpoint that I've got set right here on NT create user process, it should be the create process program because that's where we are and we can validate that. So let's do that. I'm going to say go. Now we hit the breakpoint on create process again. If I run that same command as before, it should say that we're in create process. And there you can see we are where we want to be. So now that process has been created. And specifically, we're at the point in the code, in the create process program, where it's calling create process to spawn calculator. That's where we are because we didn't set a breakpoint earlier. If I run DML-proc again, so one thing you might want to do is set breakpoints under the context of the process in question. So we have the context switch. DML-proc is one way we can do a context switch. The only problem with DML-proc is a lot of times it doesn't honor things the way it should, versus if you manually context switch, like with /i/p or whatever, that honors things better in my experience. But right now, if I want to go over to this and get into the context, I run DML-proc again, and now at the bottom you can see there's the create process handle right here. So if I click on this, this is what's going to allow us to select the user mode state. Right now, if I say bang peb, the peb is a userland structure. So it's going to say there is no peb as I lie to you right there. Normally, it would not do that because we shouldn't be under the context of the actual process. So now I'm confused as to why it's doing that. Let me go up here real quick. Yeah, it actually did put us into the process. Let me tell you what I was talking about then. If I go and run DML-proc again, and we go back in here and we say release user mode state. Now we should be back in kernel, and you can see the implicit process is a kernel mode address. So if I say bang peb now, I don't understand why it's still showing me that. This is an anomaly for me because every time I've done that in the past, if we're not under the context of a process, which we shouldn't be right now, the peb is null. And then when you go under the context of a process and you go bang peb, then it shows you the contents of the peb. That's just a weird one to me, but whatever. I guess it's just assuming now on this version of WinDebug that I must want to see the peb of the process that I care about. Now, that we're currently working with. Now, if we context switch to another process, it should change that over, but who knows right now. Let me get out of full screen and see if there's any questions here. Cool. All right, so now we've seen the context switch. We know how to validate what process is currently going on. If I say go, the debugger is running now, and we go over to here, and it says create process failed. So because the mitigation is on, we see that it fails. Okay, so we're in a good place right now. Now what I want to do is go over to IDA Pro. and let's start digging in. So we're in IDA Pro. And if I double click on this SE token is no child process restriction enforced, we are now in this function. It's a very small function, as you can see. Just this little guy here. So this function, SE security token is no child process restriction enforced. It's asking a question. So if you look down here, if we're going to read the assembly, you can see some things that's happening. Right here, we see that reference to GS 188 again. We know what that is because we just looked it up, remember, inside KPCRB. That is the pointer to, or that is where KThread is at. So we're moving KThread into the accumulator register. And then down here, we're acquiring a lock because this is an executive resource that we're going to be accessing. We're acquiring a lock on it so that other threads can read it, but they can't make any changes to it right now. It's going to be pretty critical that you lock some kernel object before you go and make changes to it. And inside here, we see down a shift right, EBX hex 13. So this is shifting some bits, and then we're doing an AND1 against BL, which is the EBX low byte. That's the lowest byte in EBX, and we're checking to see if a 1 exists. So that's clearly checking a flag. That's a bitwise AND or some kind of bitwise operation where we're checking to see if a flag is set or not. So look at the name of the function again. Token is no child process restriction enforced. So it's checking something in the token where it expects a bit to be set if the do not allow child process protection is on. Makes sense. Now there's also a function that we saw called set. Instead of get, there was one that's called set. The set one is likely the one, obviously, that goes in and turns that bit on within some field in the token. So that's what we want to get to now. We want to see what's going on and when it's getting set with the mitigation on or off. So let me zoom out to make sure there's no questions here. No, okay, great. So I want to set some breakpoints, but let's set it on the interesting functions. So SE get and set are the ones I kind of like. Eventually, I'll find it. All right. So it's going to be SE token, right? SE token. There we go. There they are. So SE token is no child process restriction enforced, and SE token set no child process restricted. Those are the ones that I care about right now because they sound like they're the ones that I should care about. So if we double click on this one where we set it, here's the function. It's a little bit bigger, but this is the one that should be setting. And down here, look at this. We've got bit set assembly instructions. So it's setting bits in something. Well, we know it's something in the token because it's telling us that it's something in the token. So we acquire a lock and then we set some bits. And then in the get function, so token get no child process restricted, you can see that we're simply ANDing and we're not setting anything. You don't see any bit set instructions because this is just checking it. These are some comments that I put up here when I was taking a look at this the other day. And we'll talk about how I got this information. I also set up a the pseudocode. So if we bring up the decompiler here, I went ahead and cleaned this up a bit. So I added what the actual arguments are and just cleaned up some other items in here. So this looks much cleaner than what you would see if you just decompile it on your own. But we can see that we're acquiring this variable here. We're acquiring KThread, and then we're locking the kernel, the resource, and then right there, token flags. Now that word token flags wasn't there. That's something I put in there. So how did I know that it should be called token flags? Because I looked at the offset within the token structure and checked it. So it's actually passing the token here. So if you look right here, I put down RBX holds the token now. So RCX holds the token, and then it gets passed into RBX. And then we're acquiring that lock. What we're acquiring a lock on ends up being the what I just mentioned, the token flags field. But we'll see this momentarily. I'm going to set a breakpoint on both of these functions. So let me grab this one. And we're going to set on that one and the set one. So let me go over to WinDebug. So we'll say breakpoints on that guy. And breakpoint on set. Now I would imagine that if we had the protection off, that this set function wouldn't be called because we don't want to turn that bit on if it's off. We also know that there's an audit only option. So let's give it that one. Right now we're at a breakpoint because something triggered the NT create user process function. So I'm going to tell it to go. All right, let me zoom out for a moment. All right, so now it's no. Oh shoot, what happened? I hope it didn't kill blue screen. No, it didn't, thankfully. For some reason, it's not connected anymore. Try to break. My kernel debugger lost its session, sadly. Oh, come on. Yeah, it's lost it. Let me go ahead and stop debugging, and then we'll reattach and see if that works. Something happened in the socket. Come on. Let's see if we get our access back. All right, we're back in. I probably lost my breakpoints though, didn't I? Yep, of course I did. So luckily I wrote those down. Let me paste those in. These are my 3 breakpoints again. So we've got a breakpoint on create process, get token, and set token. Or sorry, set the flag and get the flag. So we go. Let's see if we can get that to trigger now. All right, so I just triggered the breakpoint because we executed the create process program, and we are at NT create user process. And now we're at the same situation where we're probably under the context of cmd.exe. So we can run that same command. If I just run bang process by itself, what's it going to tell me? Great. So if I just run bang process by itself, it tells us what process we're currently in. I just wanted to show you the way that you actually go about doing it, because you don't always get, things handed to you so easily. It's important to know what these structures are, how to find them, how to know when you're talking about a structure. So if I say continue, we are at SE token get no child process restricted. Now it's checking for cmd.exe to see if that flag is on. I don't care about cmd.exe. So we're going to go. Now it's saying set, which is interesting. Let me just double check my process here. We should still be in cmd.exe, and we are. So go. Now we're at NT create user process. Let's see what process we're in now. And we should be in create process, and we are. Right there you can see create process. So we are good. Now when I continue, we should hit the get or set function next. Let's see what happens. So we go and we hit get no child process restricted. Now I just showed you this function. That is this one here. So if we want, we can watch this stuff get acquired, and I can show you some things. Let's do that real quick. So if I unassemble a few instructions, you can see it's down here. Let me zoom in to help. It's down here at the bottom where we're getting the KThread address. So I'm going to let it go a few lines until we get down to that one. Allocating a buffer. And there we are. So GS188 we know is the KThread where it's stored, and we're going to load that into RAX. So right now, RAX holds that. If I step one instruction, REX holds this now. This is KThread. So if we were to grab that and say DT and then underscore KThread and pass it that as an argument, it should populate that structure with this specific KThread entry. So nothing exciting to look at here, but that's, what we're seeing. Okay, so let's unassemble now. Now we're going to move some things around. I don't know what these are, but I don't care right now. What I did care about, though, is this one here, because that I found out was the token just by inspecting the registers. So if we go down a few instructions. So RBX right now, let's see what it holds. It holds this. I'm going to say bang token against RBX. I will be surprised, but I've been surprised a couple times today. It should tell me that there's no token at this address. Let's see. Just thinking about it. Yeah, there we go. That address does not point to a token object. RCX should, though. So if I say bang token, RCX, I hope I get the token. And we do. So now we've got the token for this process. If we scroll up here, look at all these privileges that are on. So this is your privilege list, and a ton of them are on. Anyone want to guess why all those privileges are on? This is the process we're talking about right now is the create process program. Why are all those privileges on? That's somebody with a MIC label of like high. That's not a MIC label of medium or lower for integrity. Anyone want to take a guess? It takes like 30 seconds for your comments to come through to me. I have no idea why, but I'll give that a moment. So the question again is, why is the token of the process, create process, the program, why is it so powerful? It's a simple answer. And I don't see any answers coming in, so I'll just say the answer. I apologize if you typed it in and it just still hasn't shown up. But the answer is because we started it with a administrative command prompt. The administrative command prompt spawned this process, so by default, it's running as administrator, and that's why you see all these privileges listed. There's actually one technique. It's harder to do, but instead of token stealing, you can patch this list, and you can modify the privileges field and turn a bunch of privileges on, and then spawn a new thread and make yourself more powerful than you're supposed to be. That was an alternative to stealing the token, but it takes a lot more shell code to do that. Okay, so where we're at right now is we are about to move that token from RCX into EBX. So let's do that. So if I say single step, now RBX and RCX both hold the token. Now we're decrementing some offset somewhere. I don't know what that is, but I don't really care right now unless I have to. Step one step. And now it says move into RCX, quad word pointer, RCX plus 30 hex. So RCX holds a pointer to the token object. So we're dereferencing something out of the token object and moving it into RCX. So let's look at the structure of a token now. That's what we'd want to do. Now, remember, we have to make sure we're on the right version of Windows, but let's look at the token object. And what we cared about was offset 30. So offset 30 is right here. That is the e-resource token lock. It's an executive resource token lock. Let me just look down in the structure a bit more. Token privileges, you can see where the privileges are stored right there. Okay, so token lock is moved in there. Let's go back over to the debugger. So we're moving the token lock into RCX. Let's let that happen. And we can modify our comments if we want, but I don't care about the token lock so much. Moving one into DL, I don't know what that is, but don't care. Now we're calling acquire resource share to light. So we're acquiring a lock on that object. So let's continue. Oh, I didn't want to actually go into the call. Let me step out of this function. All right, now we're back out. Now we are moving RBX plus 30 into RCX. So that again is the token lock. So let's single step. Now we are moving the token plus offset C8. So let's see what that is. C8 within a token object. C8 down here is the token flags field. So remember, I had that in my comments, and you might be saying, well, how did I know it's a token flags field? That's what we're doing here. We're identifying within the structure what field we're accessing. So we've put a lock on the token, and now we've got the token flags field that we're about to load into EDI. All right, so let's single step. So now we're calling release resource light. So we're letting go of that mutex. And let me step over this one. Now we're moving 188. So now we're loading the KThread address back into RCX again. Now we're leaving the critical region. Let's step over that one. I don't care. And now we're saying move into RBX off the stack, RSP plus 30 hex. Let's see what's there. So DD RSP plus 30 hex. That's whatever this is what that is. Let's dump it as a quad. Hold on. Dump quad L1. That puts it in the right order for us. So that's what we've got. Let's see what that is. I don't know if it's anything interesting. Actually, this. Yeah, I don't know what that is. If I can spell. Man, this debugging session's going slow. That's debugging sessions can sometimes be really slow. It's annoying. That's why I used to love this one program, VMKD. I think not VMKD. Whatever it was called, was like super fast for kernel debugging. I love that thing, but it's not supported anymore. I think it's VMKD. Maybe. While we're waiting for this thing. All right, well, when that's done, we're just going to keep walking through. So far, what have we done? We've got KThread. We got the token field for the object, for the process. We got the token flags field, and we loaded that into EDI. And now we're about to do something with that, I imagine, or at least check it. So the token flags field, that's something there's not a whole lot of documentation on, or at least I've not been able to find, because it's a flags field. So typically with flags, that's where we use these Boolean operators, and an OR, and XOR, and all that. Because when we do a bitwise AND operation, like we're checking flags. Like one time you might see like the test instruction. The test instruction does a bitwise AND operation, oftentimes on like a return from a heap alloc function, because we're checking to see if a pointer got returned. If the allocation request was successful, when we do a bitwise AND, there should be something there. If it's a 0, it's going to set the flags to one value. If it's a non-zero, it's going to set the flag to a different value. And that's how we know if the memory allocation request was successful or not. Think about the perspective of like TCP/IP flags. So TCP flags like push, fin, ACK, reset. That's just a flag field. And those binary digits are flags for specific things. You'll see those types of flags all over the place in kernel. And like you'll find out, oh, at control register 3, flag offset number 15 is the flag for SMEP, for supervisor remote execution prevention. Like a lot of that stuff is not documented by Microsoft, but people have documented it outside of Microsoft, and we can get that information. But oftentimes you're on your own when you're doing this kernel debugging. You might not know what you're looking at, and it's up to you to figure out what the heck it is. And then once you figure that out, take documentation, because you won't remember it all. So this didn't tell me anything interesting. It just told me I'm in the stack of a particular thread. So I don't care. I'm not really interested in this address anyway. This right now we're loading that stack offset. We're dereferencing it into RBX. I don't know what it is, but maybe we can find out soon. So I'm going to say unassemble to see what's coming up. So we're about to move EDI, which is the token flags field, into EAX, and then we're doing some shifts. So F11. So now the token flag field is in EAX, and we're shifting. The reason we're shifting is because, like right now, if we look at EAX, that's what's in it. If we let the shift happen, let's see what happens. Probably going to be a 0. Let's see. So continue. Now look in EAX. Now it's a 1. So it's not a 0, it's a 1. So that's a flag. It's intentionally putting a flag in a certain position. So now it does an AND against it to see if it's on or off. So these flags mean something. If we want to know what these flags mean, let's ask MSDN. So I'm going to go out here and we're going to go to MSDN. And I'm going to say SE token get no child process restricted. And that should bring up MSDN. And we go and look at this API. And it tells us what the arguments are. So we've got enforced. So that the token gets passed in as an argument when we call this this function. So we saw the token was in like RCX or something, right? We saw the token. So that token came in via an argument via a register. So the other arguments it wants are these Boolean operators of values. And so it's going to be a 1 or a 0. And it wants to know if enforce is on, unless secure is on, audit only is on. So that all makes sense. And so what we're doing right now is we're testing the flags that correspond to these values. Again, the token flags field is not very well documented from what I've seen. So you got to figure out what's in there on your own. So we're doing a shift, we're doing a check, and this is on. So that one's going to ring true. So let's unassemble, see what we're doing next. We're now going to shift. We're doing another shift down here and another shift down here. And then we're probably returning something back. Let's look at IDA real quick. Right now we're in get. So do we return anything back? Let's look at the pseudocode because I'm tired of looking at assembly. Yeah, we return a result. And the result is based on this line right here. You can see result equals, and we're doing this bitwise operation. So it's checking to see if that protection is on or not. All right, so let's go back over. And let's watch a couple more of these shifts and tests. So where are we right now? 11. So register. Oops. It's not going to be R flags. It's going to be flags by itself. It doesn't like that. How about, there we go. 0 flag is off. How about the carry flag? Carry flag is off. Okay, so right now we are at moving AL. So AL holds a 0. We're writing that to whatever RSI is pointing to. So cool. Then we're moving the token flags field into EAX again. Then we're taking something from the stack and loading into RSI again. Then we're doing another shift. I think the last one was the 13th, and this is the 14th, or hex 14. The next one's going to be hex 15. So we're shifting right now. EAX holds 82000. If we let one instruction go, it's probably going to be a 1 or a 0. Obviously, it is a 0 this time. So when we do this and against DIL, oh, interesting. That's the destination index low. So let's check DIL. That's got a 0. So we're doing an end there. That's not going to ring true. So register 0 flag. Actually, register 0 flag, carry flag. Oh, it doesn't like 2 at once. Cool. Okay, so step 1 instruction. Let's look at the carry flag. Let's look at the 0 flag. And it's on. So the 0 flag's on now. It wasn't set before because that one wasn't equal. It was a 1 versus a 0. So if we unassemble now, we're going to return back something in the accumulator register. So let's let it go a few more instructions. Register RAX. We're returning back a 0. So I imagine a 0 means that the mitigation is off. Or is it? No, it shouldn't be off because that bit was set, wasn't it? Let's see what happens next. Let's go. Now we should hit the set. We didn't hit the set one. That's interesting. So I was hoping that we would hit the set function because I expected it to go in and set that flag. So I might be running into that same problem before where I should be hitting this function and I'm not. But that flag seems to be on because if we go back over to MSDN, we can see enforced and unless secure. So which one was the one that was checked? Let's see here. So this one is going to be enforced and then unless secure. So the first one we check, and then the second one, and then the third one. So it was the second one that had the bit off. The first one had the bit on. Remember the first one that was a 1 in EAX when we checked it? That is the enforced flag was on. So that means the mitigation is there, which means it's not going to allow it to create the child process that it wants to create, which is calculator. Let's do this one more time just to validate that. All I want to do is validate that the enforced flag is on. Let's do that again real quick because I don't want to be wrong here. I'm going to go back over to this guy and we're going to run it again. I'm going to skip through this first create process call because we know that that's not the one interesting to us. You know what's interesting? Look what's getting called. So when command.exe creates the process, then, so we're not yet under the context of the create process program. It's now being created. This set no child process restricted is getting called before we hit the breakpoint inside the called process because it's telling it to set that bit. So it's going to set that flag so that when the create process program is executed and launched, that flag is going to be set inside of it. And then it's being checked as we saw. So if we go here, now we're creating the process for create process program. We go again. Now we're in the get function. So what we want to do is check that first bitwise AND operation. So let's go down to it. It's going to take me a moment to get there. So I got to step over a couple of function calls. Actually, let me zoom out so we can do this faster until I get there. So I'm just going to step over a couple things. You're like, couldn't you just set a breakpoint? Yes, I could, but I'm already invested. Let's step over that one. And step over that one. Step over that one. And then we should be getting here in just a moment. Here we go. So I'm going to zoom back in. We are now on the very first check. And when we looked at the pseudocode, we saw that the first check is the is enforced one, right? That's the first one being checked right here. This is where we are in the assembly. So if we go back over here and we let this shift, so RAX right now holds that. If we let it shift, so step 1 instruction, RAX now holds a 1. The flag is on. That's what's being returned back. The flag is on, so it knows not to launch the child process. Now, what I want to do now is I'm going to go turn the mitigation off, and we're going to go back and check this again and validate if I'm right or wrong. I hope I'm right, but I haven't gone this far to find out, but it makes sense that it would be this way. So let's go. I'm going to go turn that mitigation off. So let's change this. Oh, geez, this is going to take them. Let me temporarily pause my breakpoints here if it becomes a problem. All right, scroll down. Let's turn it off. Apply. We hit the breakpoint. Let me get through this. Breakpoint disable all temporarily. All right, that way we can go. Let's turn this mitigation off. Now it's off. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn the breakpoints back on again. And breakpoint enable all. Go. Now we're going to run it. All right, we hit the breakpoint. Now, if what I was saying is true, two things should be different. One is we shouldn't now call the set function from within cmd.exe. And two, that flag should be off now. So that's what we're going to validate. So let's continue. And notice that it didn't call set this time. It called get instead. If I continue again, we go straight to nt create user process. So that validated it. So my assumption was correct, which is the calling process is the one that has to call the function to set the bit for the process that's about to be created. And now when we continue, we call this get no child process restricted. We're going to check to see if that first value is now not a 1 and it's a 0. So let's do that. I'm going to say single step here. We're going to step over a couple function calls. Give me a moment. Come on. There we go. Step over that one. Step over that one. Step over that one. All right, we're here now. All right, here comes that shift. So here's that first argument, which is the is enforce flag. What I'm expecting it to be is a 0 now instead of a 1. So let's let the shift operation occur. F11, register RAX, and it's off. Bam. Okay, cool. We figured it out. I did not get this far when I was prepping because I didn't have time, but now we know exactly how this mitigation works. So I don't know. That's fun to me. I think it's kind of interesting to see how they implement these controls because that's what allows you to figure out how to bypass the controls. Like, you know what you have to do now. In order to bypass this mitigation, you would have to figure out some way to get that flag turned off, which is going to be kind of hard since it's the calling process that checks to see if that flag is to be set in the child, which is kind of hard. You missed these streams. Where have I been? I was working too hard, doing other things, but I'm going to try and get them back up regularly again. So, I want to keep going through these mitigations. The next, because for myself too, because I don't really know how they all work. The one that I accidentally turned on was that disable win32k syscall table. And I'm curious. I have no idea how that one works. So maybe we can look at that one next time or choose a different one. But I think that's enough for today. We're an hour and 20 minutes in. Happy to hang out and answer some questions or anything. But oh, and by the way, we've got, if you haven't heard, I've been tweeting about it, but we've got Hackfest coming up in November. We're doing it in Hollywood, and it's going to be great. We've got Chompy coming out for a keynote. We've got Lena Lau, who is Inversecos, coming out for a keynote. We've got Connor McGarr coming to do a kernel talk. We've got Ruben Boonen from IBM coming out to do some talk. We got a lot of great people and a ton of like fun stuff going on in the evening. It's only $325 for if you're going to go in person, and it's free if you attend online. But if you attend online, you don't get to do all the in-person capture the flags and all the crazy stuff we're going to be doing. But hopefully y'all some can come out. But cool. I don't see any questions coming up, so we'll just go ahead and call it. But hope you have a great weekend. Hopefully that was informative to you. I had fun with it, so we will do it again soon. Thanks.